Hello, everyone. This is Michelle Lee, one of the violinists of the Tesla Quartet, and I'm here joined by Clifton Ingram, who has wrote for us a very wonderful quartet as part of the Tesla's Alternating Current Commissioning Project. Hi, Cliff. Thank you so much for joining me for a talk, and thank you for the great piece that you wrote for us.
Hi everyone. My name is Cliff. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Tesla Quartet. I'm really excited to be a part of this commissioning project. Um, yeah.
Well, I'm curious, how did you come to composition of all, of all things that you can choose from?
Um, I think like a lot of sort of younger folks who have come into sort of composition, I guess I came about composing in sort of a roundabout way. I grew up in like rural Vermont, in northeast Vermont, in a place called St. Johnsbury, and it, since it's rather rural, there's not a lot of like orchestral sort of resources and things available. So my early experience with music was sort of all across the map. I played a lot of folk music, I played a lot of rock music, I played jazz. Um, I played classical. I played a lot of music at sort of in a sacred setting, including like handbells and singing. Um,
Nice.
and so I got to, I mean, I got, like very sort of blessed in that way. Like I got to know music through a lot of different ways. And so in a way, I think it makes sense to be a composer if you sort of study a lot of instruments. Um,
I see what you mean. Yeah.
maybe a jack of all trades, but not a master of any any of the instruments myself. Um, but in specific, I think playing in rock bands and also playing jazz in sort of a smaller like combo or setting was really something that got me going. Where especially the rock thing, where when you start being in a band and writing your own music, a lot of the times we would write together within the band,
Oh,
and it sort of, yeah, for me it was really like an eye-opening experience of like, oh, I can create music. um, yeah, and so from there it just sort of kept
evolved
going, and
to
yeah.
this way, huh? So the classical music was introduced to you actually much later, in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a lot of the times I sort of feel like an outsider to sort of that conservatory tradition. I didn't. I went to a conservatory for grad school actually, and that was a very eye-opening experience where all of a sudden everyone knew all the repertoire and everything, and I had to play a lot of catch up with that. But
Yeah.
I know from an early age too. My mom is a school teacher and in like grade school, and at the time she was teaching French, and so we had a lot of French music around the house.
There you go.
And so my introduction to classical music was probably more like the Impressionism and like the Debussy's and stuff like this, and I really loved that.
Yeah.
That sort of I also really loved. I wanted to be a painter before I ever wanted to be a musician, and I had sort of fallen in love with Monet from a young age and everything. So like, I think that was also a big thing for me. That's sort of the beginning of the modern period. Was really
Right.
my first experience with a lot of classical music as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's really fascinating. So she groomed you in a very colorful way. Because,
Oh, my mom.
Monet, yeah, it's such a wonderful era of art, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. No, she's. I mean, my mom is a big uh, history buff, and she's a big fan of the arts in general. Like, it brought us to a lot of museums, and my father too. And I think I was very lucky to sort of grow up with like a classic 1960s, 70s vinyl collection that I sort of inherited from my parents too. So I listened to
Awesome.
a lot of like Joan Baez and stuff like that growing up.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. So like coming to Beethoven's music, how does that feel to you? I mean, you're exposed to a lot of French music, French, the great French music. And then now you're all grown up, you're introduced to classical music and going back to learning about Beethoven and influenced by Beethoven. And you have to write this music based on Opus 18 number 5, the Andante Cantabile movement. So how's that journey like feel to you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like my relationship with Beethoven, I feel like I got into Beethoven pretty late.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, in general, the 19th century, I feel like I got to the 19th century really late, which is maybe funny because I feel like a lot of folks their experience with
Right.
the 19th century music, the Romantic sort of period, is like the first thing that
True.
they
Yeah.
really start
Yeah, you're
learning.
right. Yeah.
Um, and so I don't know. I mean, I was really lucky to study with uh, a fellow by the name of Jan Swafford, who, when I was studying private composition lessons with him,
Hmm.
he was writing a book about Beethoven, and it's like a huge,
There you go.
800,000 page book.
Whoa.
And yeah, and Jan Swafford is somebody who, I mean, he wrote a great bio about Brahms. He's well known for his bio about Ives. He just is finishing up, I think, the annotations and such for a new book on Mozart.
Hmm.
And he's a great storyteller.
Mm.
Is where I'm landing on this point. And
Yeah.
so he would, at the time, since he was working on the Beethoven book when I was studying with him, he would often relate what I was doing to
Hmm.
Beethoven.
Hmm.
And so, sort of conceptually, I also think that Beethoven is really it was an interesting choice
Hmm.
for Tesla to have us write pieces based off of this quartet,
Hmm.
off of the theme and variation movement. Um,
Hmm.
and I think just because right now we're all the musical world and the world in general is having to do a lot more with less, and uh, I think Beethoven is my feeling about Beethoven whenever I listen is just how much he can do with just a little musical kernel,
Cells. Yeah. Totally.
and that's something that's really valuable right now to think about
Yeah.
as we
That's a
all
good
go
point.
forward. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
So thank you so much for writing such a great piece. So like this is not our first collaboration, you and I worked together before and this time so it's so much fun for me to get to know you even further. Based on these experience for me, like your music has such a quality that like you really thought out every single second of the music, and I really truly appreciate that as a performer. It's beautifully written, really, and it's so considerate the way that you write onto the page, and it really speaks well. So, what's your process of composing these music?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you. That's like a huge compliment in my book. To sort of the idea of for the last handful of years or so, since I got out of grad school, I've really tried to um, pare things away and try to get a lot more intentional about what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And the Tesla commission, I thought I love it because a lot of the time, the way that I had been working on that for a number of years was to take musical quotations or material, often from sort of Baroque sources.
Hmm.
Again, my mom, the French teacher, I love French music, especially early 18th century. Um, there's just some really wild stuff
Hmm.
that happens sort of pre Lully, before everything sort of gets codified.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm talking sort of more about this sort of style brisé thing with what's Jacques Champion de Champagnières is a sort of lesser known composer that I find really interesting.
Hmm.
Or somebody like Froberger has like wild harmonies, especially on period instruments with like the temperaments and
Yeah.
such.
Yeah.
But using quotations like that to compose, to base my own music off of that seems really sort of natural to me. Um, because I guess this is a me problem, but I have sort of a discomfort about sort of authorship in terms of how classical music is made. Like, I'm uncomfortable with sort of a hierarchical sort of I'm the composer, I'm at the top, and I hand down this thing to the performers, and the performers play it, and they hand it down to the audience. Um, and so using other people's material is sort of a way of sort of not making the music about me or decentering my own authorship in that way. Uh, and in general, it also lets me play with a lot of things that I'm really interested in. Like lately, in the last handful of years, I've gotten really interested in a visual art style that happens sort of in that sort of turning into the 17th century, which is like sort of the Mannerist art, or the very particularly a technique called anamorphosis, which is basically like if you have, it's using perspective theory, where if you're standing at one angle at a painting, you see something, but then if you move position, you might see a completely thing. So it's sort of hidden images in a lot of this art, and moving your body as like a listener, or as a sort of a viewer or an audience member or whatever, is sort of a really interesting thing to me. Just to have different ways to come up with things, and that is just it's just sort of a fruitful technique to play and stretch material, because some of it's sort of an experimental thing where you have to play a lot with the material to get something that works for you. And I really enjoy putting a lot of time into the playing aspect of playing with material and seeing what it does. And I spend a lot of time messing around with microtones and silliness that will never make it to the page, you know.
Well, no, you brought to the page so clearly and so communicative way, you know, it just speaks for itself. So string quartet as a genre, I know you've already written many, at least two I know that you wrote for the string quartet. Do you like the genre of the string quartet?
I'm really intimidated by the string quartet genre, and I have been for years and years and years, and I had sort of been avoiding it for a while, I guess. It really feels like a genre where like composers prove something, or like maybe historically that's how we view the narrative of our history. And in that way, I have avoided it, but recently I wrote a sort of longer quartet for Del Sopel quartet, and that's all based off of a specific piece of visual art, or from a treatise on visual art about that sort of anamorphosis, perspective-driven kind of thing. And then that was the first string quartet I had ever written, actually.
Oh, is it right? Okay, so just one. Okay. Well, now you wrote two.
Yes, and so now I have two. And I had written a couple of years ago, too, I wrote a string trio as well.
I see.
So I've been running a lot of string music lately.
That's good. Well, string music sometimes has more flexibility, I think, to play with. And I think string quartet, you know, I know it's a little bit scary, I think, because you have to, you know, somehow understand four different voices in ways that speaks one idea. But at the same time, I think a good string quartet, in my opinion, has all the flexibility that one can have. Like you're saying, you're stepping to one direction and seeing different shapes and images, and I think there's a lot of room for that. So I'm so glad that you step in to this genre. So yeah, much appreciated. Thank you so much for joining me for a little chat today. It's such a pleasant experience for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.